Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for all coming out today, taking the time to listen to my story and to share this moment with me. Today, I would like to have a conversation with you all about family. Something that carries deep meaning for all of us, whether we realize so or not, and whether we wish so or not. Often overlooked or downplayed, which is not something bad necessarily. It would be absolutely exhausting to constantly be thinking about our families and analyzing everything that's happening. I mean, it's enough of a hassle to deal with them anyways. But I think for the next, well, at least 17 minutes and 15 seconds, we're going to do just that. I'm Idrissa Gouem. I'm 19 years old, and I'm a forthcoming psychology student at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. And yes, that means you are going to be schooled by a to-be student. But mostly, I'm just a young man with a deep interest for psychology. And this interest has been there for as long as I can remember, at least. For as long as I can remember, I've been analyzing people, observing what they do, trying to figure out the connections, links, and causes of why they do what they do. Why do they? I've had the chance also to be enlightened by family counselors and therapists, both as a client, but also as a curious student, to find out what makes people tick, and more importantly, what makes families tick. If we're going to talk about family, let's first introduce mine. Let's start with my mother. She was born here in Haarlem, not too far from here actually. She was the youngest, or actually not the youngest, the third youngest of 7. So a big household. Also a household that was not as stable as it should have been. And my mother, being the fierce woman that she is, was never ever scared to speak up about that. And this has characterized her the rest of her life. And I appreciate her for that. For never, ever failing to speak her mind. A true artist, as she is, she graduated from the Art Academy in The Hague, being able to express herself through the brush, the pencil, the chisel, but also on a stage like this. Actually on this stage where she has played. And she also always loved to dance. So, somewhere within her 30s, she decided to take some dance classes, where she happened to meet a particular man. That man is my father. Born far away, on a different continent, in Burkina Faso, Busuma to be exact. He was born also in a large family, the second oldest brother, who went to live with his uncle at the age of 6. This disconnected him from his own family, and this has made a lasting impact on him. An impact that he didn't know how to deal with. When my father came into his adolescence, he traveled abroad to Egypt. He studied PR in Cairo. And after that, he traveled here to the Netherlands. He had a friend living here who could take care of him, or at least give him a place to stay. But with no visa, it wasn't going to be easy. He would have to work himself up from the ground again. So, delivering newspapers on his Tomos moped, learning a completely new language which sounded very, very weird, he also decided to take some dance classes. And so they met, and I'm glad they did. And I also appreciate them. Appreciate them for these stories These stories that I've only really went to understand most recently. Stories that might not get told because the pain that is still lasting within them is not processed yet. But when these stories do get told, when these stories do get shared within families, people change and people can heal. Through this, I've not only grown to appreciate my parents more, but also my little sister, with which in just the past few years I've started to have deep conversations with, in which I've realized, wait, we actually had the same childhood. We actually went through the same things. This might seem obvious to any normal bystander, but when you're so deep in it, sometimes it can feel like you're alone. And I think that is something that my sister and I both felt. When I was around 6 years old, my parents got divorced. Something that really struck me hard. So hard even that the only way for me to really deal with it was to not deal with it. I would not dare express my anger, my sadness. I would internalize it, keep it inside of me. And on top of that, we would just shovel like 3 feet of, yeah, it is what it is. And up until my teenage years, this was my sentiment. This was my reality, and I believed it. When people ask me, well, how is that? Divorced parents, I was like, it's always been like that. It hasn't been, but it felt like it. So, where do I stand now then? What has changed since then? Well, it seems to be that when I was around like 13 or 14, I suddenly started to gain some kind of consciousness. I don't know how. I regained some introspection. I started to feel out that maybe something was up. And then I started to ask questions. A lot of questions. And these questions never stopped. They still haven't. They have brought me to where I am today. A slightly more healed, more grown person. Someone who I couldn't have been without asking these questions to my parents. Oh, how was your childhood? What did happen? What I found out is that things were pretty similar, which struck me. I always saw my parents as completely different people. People with completely different experiences, completely different lives to me. But as we got to talking, as we uncovered more and more, we found out that patterns were present. Patterns that spanned entire generations. So, what does that mean? It means that for generations, families all across the globe, every family that has ever lived, has had to cope with problems, difficulties they face. Each family has their own. I felt that within my household, stability was something I lacked. A stability that I couldn't find there. The direct physical space around me was chaotic, and my parents have always been chaotic, something that I have taken over from them. So I went looking elsewhere, or actually. Stability found me. In my 3rd year of primary school, a friend introduced me to a football club called TEDxYouth, right here in Haarlem. The Haarlem Boys. We were. I went for a tryout, and even though I only had some old sneakers, I did like it, and I came back. Little did I know that that day marked almost a 10-year period in which I would train with the same coach. A coach that gave me a sense of stability. A sense of stability that I desperately craved, and that made me able to transform myself into the next version of myself. So, what does that mean globally? It means that oftentimes, when people lack something within their own household, they will look for something to fill that hole. They will look for a substitute. Alternatively, people may also look for something that is very similar to their own household. They will look for familiarity. And this is not necessarily something bad. I mean, familiar is, well, familiar. We know what we can expect, which is nice. And we associate that with security. But what if what is familiar to you is something that is inherently insecure? This is what happens when people grow up in households in which, well, they might not feel at place, but at least it's their household. And I think we all feel like that in some way. So how do we go about breaking these cycles when we feel that eventually our subconscious might still drive us to what is familiar? The first step, as I said before, will be to identify the intergenerational patterns. After that, there are multiple steps we can take. We can, for example, dive inside. We can look in ourselves. What kind of patterns do I find within myself? After that, maybe we look towards our parents, our siblings. After that, our grandparents. Maybe even, if there's any record of them, your grandparents. We might find that generation after generation might alternate between different kinds of behavior. I like to see it as a seesaw. Generation A does this, so Generation B doesn't want that, so they do this. Generation C sees what Generation B does, and they go back. In this way, people try to break the intergenerational patterns, but it could often mean that they fail. So, what does that mean? Does it mean that we should have absolutely no regard for our intergenerational patterns and just look ahead and try to find our own vision? I tried to do something like that. It was my 3rd year in high school. The classes were completely reshuffled. I knew only a handful of people, and even those that I knew, I wasn't so sure. But one day, I sat in music class and I was somehow talking to my classmate about a little game called Counter-Strike, which I really liked. And suddenly, the girl in front of me jolts around. She's like, "You play Counter-Strike?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course I play Counter-Strike." She's like, well, we play it too. And I was like, we, as in like plural. She's like, yeah, I play it with that guy and like that guy and like that guy. And I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. Next thing you know, boom. I'm playing video games with them every day after school. Boom, I'm with them every break, sitting at the same table for 3 years, 4 years actually. Boom, every class, we see each other. The lockdown hits, whenever we could go outside, whenever restrictions would soften a little bit, we would be there together. At some point, it wasn't even about the game. It was about each other. It was about giving each other a sense of stability. This friend group taught me something that my sports coach couldn't. Because these were people of my own age, I could also take on a role of mentorship. If my coach taught me how to walk, these people taught me how to dance, to express myself, to learn how to mentor, to learn how to love, and to learn how not to love. This group was also the first time that I actively started recognizing these patterns. I started seeing the mirrors between family dynamics. I saw what someone might have missed in their own family and saw how they filled that up within the group, which people they were attracted to, what familiar people they were attracted to, what they saw in everyone. And I also saw that in myself. And I started asking myself, am I attracted to this person because I like them? Yes. But they're also really familiar. I feel like I know them without even knowing them that well. They felt secure. So, what can we do? What can we do as multiple generations sit here in this room? I see fathers, mothers, daughters, sons. What can we do to break through our intergenerational patterns? Well, I don't have all the answers. Mostly a lot of questions. But I do know one thing. We can do this together. Because the only way we can break through is by understanding each other, asking one another, and seeing that at the end of the day, we aren't that different anyways. So I ask you, within your own family, within your close friends, try and find these patterns. See if they serve you or if they don't. And then, together, break through them and create a new vision for your day of tomorrow. Thank you.